of Housekeeping Reminders. We can earn up to 3 NAB, NCAP, NCTRC, and/or NCC-DPCU credits today. To earn the credits, you need to attend the full session, so as few obviously as 1 and as many as 3. Hopefully you've enjoyed all the amazing programming today. To receive these CUs, you need to fill in the survey that we will share with you at the end of the session, either in the chat of Zoom or by email. Please fill it no later than midnight Eastern Time on Friday, February 18th, so we can process certificate of attendance. And obviously we will issue up to 3 hours of CU credit. Note that due to the high number of attendees, certificate will be sent out via email throughout the week of February 22nd and no later than the Friday of that particular week, again February 28th, by the end of the day. Each certificate is going to be emailed individually, and please contact us after February 28th to follow up if we're missing anything regarding to these certificates. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. I am sure that none of us are new to Zoom, but as a reminder, we have 2 features to engage with the audience and our speakers, the chat and the Q&A. If you are to select the chat, make sure you select everyone so that everybody can see your contribution. If you wish to ask a question to our speakers, please make sure to use the Q&A feature. With that, I am extremely excited to introduce us to the moderator of our panel, Rita Altman. Rita, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. It's so exciting to be here. The sessions have been wonderful, and I really feel that this one builds so beautifully on the others, because we'll talk about a lot of the techniques and hear a lot more from both Doctors Kerr and Jones about some of the biology and the neuro changes that occur. So in this session, we're really going to talk about a lot of the innovations that Naomi Feil originally came up with. Vicki talked earlier about back in the 60s and 70s, Naomi began her work in founding the whole validation method. And today, these noted experts are going to tell us some ways that validate or further validate validation. Some of the things that we'll be talking a little more in depth about will be the techniques of centering, using that genuine eye contact that we talked about during the last session. We heard from that panel, using empathy and using touch and using music. So Feil's methods were really the bedrock for so many of these innovations. At the completion, you'll be able to, as attendees, outline 1 or 2 innovations in the field. You'll be able to understand some of these validation techniques a little more in depth, and even thanks to these esteemed panelists, be able to understand the impact they have on the brain and on the biology and on a person's well-being. That's why we're all here, right? And also to describe how music impacts mood and how it affects you in your everyday work and engaging with your residents. And so now it's my honor to introduce these 2 panelists. The first, Dr. Fiona Kerr, is an international consultant and speaker. She integrates cognitive neuroscience, psychology, and systems engineering to expand our understanding of the wonders of human connection. She runs the NeuroTech Institute and Focus Consulting and has advisory roles on so many boards that it would take 5 minutes to name them all. I do want to say that it is amazing that she has joined us in the middle of the night, her time. And we thank her because she is speaking and working so hard, and yet has set her alarm, or maybe has decided to stay up all night. We're not sure yet. Maybe you'll tell us. But you look well rested, so I would say you've gotten some sleep. So thank you for joining us today. Also, we have Dr. LaDon Jones, and LaDon is the academic director for the graduate program in health administration at National University. He has more than 30 years experience in the healthcare industry, and his area of expertise is in strategy and organizational behavior and design. And one of his subspecialty wonderful areas of interest is music, as he is also a musician. So we are really looking forward to hearing more from, and they've both given me permission to call them by first name. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from LaDon. So to start out, question one will go to you, Fiona. You have contributed immensely to the growing body of work on the neuropsychological impact of human interaction. And over 40 years ago, when cognitive neuroscience was just in its infancy, at the very, very beginning, just emerging, Naomi Feil developed validation based on psychological theories and social work and research, and most importantly, from her experiential work with that she gathered from working with disoriented older adults. Those of us that practice validation know that in order to be successful in validating, we must first center, and we heard that in the last panel, the importance of taking those few deep centering breaths to sort of, as Naomi tells us, shut down the internal dialogue in our own brains so we can be fully present to exquisitely listen, and so we can be fully resourceful. Can you, I know you can, tell us or share with us how centering helps the brain to focus and to focus the attention on the act of communicating?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that go on. One of the things that we hear about a lot is about what happens physically when you take a breath, especially when you hold that breath for a few seconds and then you put it out. So you make changes to your heart rate, to your various things around cardiac issues. You also change the way that some parts of the brain start to light up. And what you do then is you alter the level of the activity in some of the parts of the brain which are always kind of waiting for information to come in. But another thing that happens when you do that is when we look, I guess when we look out and up, especially when we look at each other, but just when you look out of a window or take those breaths, when we look up, we go into something called abstraction. So if you like, we let the brain kick back and play. And so instead of it being very task-oriented and very centered on what's going on or fixing something, the brain starts to abstract and it starts to connect in other ways. And what we get then is we get that kind of bigger picture and we start to engage empathy more. There's a number of things that start to happen in our brains when we do that. And so it's a really interesting process.
So from a very simple act of taking deep breaths, or as I know you'll talk with us more shortly about the act of looking up or looking out, those amazing changes can happen that then make us more prepared or more in the moment, so to speak, to be with a person that we're communicating with.
Yeah, because the other thing that happens is we look in. So we have more of, we have more of a capability to be able to get in touch. So when we distract ourselves all the time, if we're always just looking quickly, waiting for the next answer, or if we pick up our phones, that kind of thing, that distraction stops us being able to connect with who we are, lumps and all, and when you're self-connected, you are a lot more forgiving about both your own flaws and other people's. So it gives us a very different perspective and a much wider, deeper perspective on ourselves, on the world we live in, and also on the people that we're interacting with. We are more warm and forgiving and connected.
Beautiful. An attitude of empathy is a foundational element of validation. Naomi Feil teaches us that that's the essential component of building trust, and especially with building trust with older adults that we're validating. And one of the techniques is to use genuine eye contact. And the panelists, again, in the session before, talked about the beauty of using that particular technique. Can you explain how face-to-face interaction, which entails that eye gaze, builds trust and empathy? How can that build empathy?
Yeah, so we have this incredible process in humans. We're physically rewarded for looking at people's eyes. We have oxytocin receptors in and around our eyes at a very high level. And what that means is when we look at each other and when it's a warm affiliative gaze, And we get what's called retinal alignment. So we're actually looking at each other's retinas. We're looking directly into each other's eyes. We spark off lots and lots of this oxytocin. And oxytocin is a fantastic thing for well, everything from your immune system right through to the love drug, if you like. It's that connection. But the other thing that we do is we start to take a number of neurons that are quite specific and fire them. So there is a subset of mirror neurons that just looks for smiles and connected gaze, and you set off oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine, but you also read people's intent. And that begins to connect up some of those aspects of trust. So it's those very first aspects of trust. Another neuron that we have is the Economo neuron. And that's only in animals that have very long lens social relationships, because what it does, it's called the trust neuron. And it takes activity and it takes emotion and it starts to cross connect them. It's a very long spindle neuron. And it starts to say, right, this is how you fit with me in a social system. And so the number of firings that you get, I guess it modulates that whole social brain. And you start to lower the stress response, and you also start to reframe vulnerability. And that's a really important aspect in what you're doing, because people feel more connected, more like they belong, empathized with, and they're not as vulnerable. So we really settle down various types of nervous system.
That's amazing. And to hear and think about all of those chemicals that are moving around in all of our brains, and the effect or the positive effect they have, and that trust building, especially over time when we're first learning validation. We meet with that resident, that client every week. And it sometimes that trust just doesn't build in a second. It can take, yeah. So your explanation, yeah, it can take a while. And your explanation helps us to understand what's going on even inside our brains as we're trying to be centered and trying to do that genuine eye contact. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just say, it takes a while, but at the same time, we fire off our spindle neuron in under a 1/12 of a second. So yes, it takes a while, but humans are wired to be positive. I mean, we have such large subsets of neurons that just look for affiliative gaze. So it is a very strong thing with us.
So important. And I love that affiliative gaze. The importance of really truly making that eye contact, not just brushing by someone in a hallway, but taking the time to make that eye contact, and what a difference that can make. So think about this, everybody out there. These spindle neurons are working probably sometimes overtime in our world.
Yes.
Your research, Fiona, in your work with the nurse-patient relationship research, where you talk about how a trusting nurse-patient relationship is integral to the delivery of really quality care that's truly person-centered. Can you share some of your work in this area, and also particularly, I know we mentioned this in the last panel too, the use of touch and how that can make a big difference. It's a big difference maker in providing care. Thank you.
Sure. And that partly, I just saw a question flash up as well about what does that mean if you're visually impaired or if you're not looking at people. The beautiful thing about people, humans, is that we have about 6 ways that we directly connect. So yes, we have eye gaze. We also have something called interbrain synchronization. We can actually measure that connection between people. We have touch, so we'll talk about that. We even have chemo signals. So when we share space, we give off emotional chemicals, about 2,000 that we pick up and we give to each other. So we have this fantastic array of things. So even if people can't see you directly, there are so many other ways that when we're in proximity to another person, we're actually, interacting. So a carer also gets a lot of these chemicals because a lot of them are very cyclic. If I'm looking at you and I'm getting more oxytocin, you're getting more oxytocin. And in fact, that's why, the young lovers that stare at each other, we actually have to have other chemicals like vasopressin that dampen that, or we just do nothing except look at each other. So the carer is getting very much the same chemicals, and some of those chemicals allow the carer to pick up more information. Their radar gets better. And then we get into touch. So in our skin, we have things called C fibers. So we have nerve fibers in the skin. The A fibers are very fast, myelinated, that's pain, that kind of thing. C fibers are slow, they're not myelinated. And what they're there for is, therefore, because they're so slow, they're picking up rich data. So when you're touching someone at a slow, if you stroke someone's arm that you like, at a not too fast, not too slow, and it's just gentle, then you set these C fibers off and you get this cascade of chemicals, because the C fibers, they go through the emotional parts of the brain before the stimuli actually hits the brain and tells the brain physically what's happening. So you get endorphins, opioids, you get your dopamine at drug level when you have positive touch. You get a high level of oxytocin again, so you set off your immune system. And then what you start getting is you will get pro-inflammatory cytokines dropping, you'll get leukocytes increasing. So the kind of massage, there's lovely studies on massage helping people to heal after radiotherapy. It's that strong. And so, and the other thing it does is it sets off amygdala and hippocampal areas in your brain, and it calms down your autonomic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system, and something called general affect, which is a way to be more calm about what's going on, that starts to happen as well. So you're doing so many things when you get those C fibers firing.
That's amazing. There is a question up, and one of the participants asks how masks are making a difference right now when it comes to these types of communications.
Yes, they're making a lot of difference, and things like PPE as well. I have an aged mum, and I deal with aged care, and one of the problems is you get carers who, even nurses and those sorts of people, who just want to take off the gloves and the mask because they can't touch people and they can't communicate properly. So masks are very difficult for older people, especially but all of us, because part of voice is another thing. Voice is beautiful. 2 to 8 hertz sets off theta, gamma, delta in your brain. It has a gorgeous, that's a whole discussion. I think LaDon and I are going to have it at some time. And it's massively connective, because it's very socially connective. But the other thing is probably between 30 and even 60% of us discussing things and talking is lip reading. And so when you put the mask on, you lose a massive amount of information.
We lose a lot. How can we make it up? Like, I guess make it up more through the eye or through touch,
yes.
or in some.
Yes, again, our eyes. So I've got a thing which is smiling with your eyes, and I speak a couple of times, I guess a month on something, and talk about the eye hug. That lovely kind of hug that you can squish your eyes up like, oh, you're gorgeous. And we can see that even with a mask on. So yes, we take away an awful lot of information, but if you're looking at someone directly and you smile, the brain knows you're smiling. And the eye is a really important part of the smile, because when people just smile with all of these muscles, then it's not a real smile. It's not until you take all of these ocular muscles into a smile that the brain knows that's a real smile. It knows the others are a fake smile. So you've got a very big smile area around your eyes.
Beautiful, and a beautiful reminder that we should all be smiling more with our eyes, especially during this time.
Yes.
Thank you. LaDon, as having a background as a nurse as well, I know that you would probably want to chime in about this topic, the nurse-patient relationship and touch. Anything you'd like to add before we jump into the music?
Well, I think that touch is in a way to communicate. I know when I worked in ICU, we had a nurse there who somehow her patients would always get better, it seemed, with the same medication and all of this. And I think I look back and she, number one, would sing to her patients, but also she would use a lot of touch. And of course, I know that there are members who are tuning in now who recognize the power of touch and healing. And I don't think we truly understand. I think the impact of that. So again, right along with Fiona's comments, touch is very powerful. And I certainly want to chime in with the eyes and the smile. I can see it right there, Fiona, when you were talking. I could see it in your eyes. And how many times have we all in the last year or so been able to interface with someone? They have their mask on, but you can still see the smile. When they were smiling, you could see it in their eyes. And so absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, you talked about the power of the smile and eye contact. Music is another really very powerful validation technique. And some even say that music outsmarts Alzheimer's. Feil chose music as one of the verbal validation techniques long before a lot of this research that has been showing the very positive impact and all the parts of the brain that fire just from hearing music. So LaDon, would you please share more about yourself and your work and explain some of the outcomes that music can have on both our behavior and our mood? We're all ears.
Well, I'd be happy to. Thank you. And in fact, if I had the right song, I'd sing it to you. And I think we'd probably understand it a lot better, right? But I am honored to be here. I'm excited to be here to talk about music and some of the other topics that I've been listening to, and certainly to share this panel with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Fiona Kerr. So I'm excited about that. I want to start with the definition of passion. People always say, what is your passion? And what is passion? And I guess the definition of passion for me is whatever you're doing, you don't know whether you're working or playing. And I try to modern, my life after that, so whether I'm teaching students or learning from them, or whether I'm singing in various venues, or whether I'm actually conducting research in this area, it's all passion for me. So if it's not passion, I tend to not do it. I think music obviously has some significant impacts on so many parts of our health. But unfortunately, music is used primarily for entertainment. If you think about it, you write a song that's popular or you make a big hit. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that we have not spent as much time really looking at the benefits scientifically that music has on our psyche, on our physiology, and all of that. So I'm excited to be talking about it. So I guess the best way to explain this is my son, who is an astrophysicist now, he and I talk a lot about quantum physics, right? Now, before I get too geeky on you, I just want to say that we talk about how we're not really solid. We're always vibrating, even though we appear to be solid. And if you agree with that, then if we're vibrating, then there's a frequency there. And if there's a frequency there, then you should be able to hear it. And so I've been thinking about this for a long, long time in terms of what actually happens when are our bodies talking to us or singing to us? And I like to call them bio songs. And so I've spent a lot of the last 5 years really recording brain waves, quite frankly, and converting them to sound. Okay, and I know that really sounds geeky, and as you can see the screen here, I'll explain to you what I've done. But going back to, I think, Fiona's comment, there are at least 4 types of brain waves, probably more than that, but the ones that are probably well known are the alpha waves, theta waves, delta waves, and gamma waves. And basically, in the presence of these waveforms, one can say that you're in a certain consciousness. For example, with alpha waves, you tend to be more in a meditative, awakened situation where you have more creativity. You have very positive neurotransmitters that are firing, so you feel good. And so you really want to be in an alpha wave. And a lot of the meditation music that's been out for years now are really do kind of start with the alpha waves. So what I did was I was able to create my own, record my own alpha waves. I have a device that's really like a portable EEG machine. And I created my own alpha waves. I recorded my alpha waves, and then I created a song from that alpha wave, and I called it Blue. And if you can look at this screen, I know it's kind of busy, but if you'll look at the bottom left-hand corner, you see the note there, and it says Blue. And I named it Blue because that's my favorite color, not because I was not feeling well. So I named it Blue. And then what I did was I recorded this screen so that what you'll see if you look to your right up at the top, you see those squiggly lines, those are my alpha waves, okay? And so right below that, you see the dial, those two dials. And what you're really looking for, and my hypothesis when I did this was that if I listen to my own alpha waves, my brain, through what's called entrainment, right, will entrain on my alpha waves and remember, kind of like a photograph, like a musical photograph, and remember when I was in a very relaxed state. And those dials should all go to the right when you start listening to this music. Now, there's a lot of other things going on in this video, but I just want you to focus when you listen to this music. This is music that came from my own alpha waves and brain. And now we're going to look at those dials. So what you should see is those dials should actually go to the right, and they should turn like a blue and a green. So I'll let you listen to about 1 minute of it. This was about a 30-minute video, but about 1 minute, and just pay attention to those dials. Thank you, Charles. But thank you. Interesting, huh? And I had no idea this was going to happen. I mean, so this was kind of like Einstein, right? He always says, all answers lie in observation. So I just basically turned it on and just closed my eyes and let the music play. And when I looked up and looked at the recording, I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. It actually works. So it's always nice when that happens. So I have a lot more to share, but I'll stop right there. So I think the bottom line, Rita, is that I think Fiona mentioned this too. When we start to get these alpha waves or these consciousness states that our brainwave shows us, whether it's gamma 2, good neurotransmitters are coming out. They're pouring out, whether it's melatonin or dopamine and the serotonin. It's all good and it's healthy for us. I like to use the word, it's healthy vitamins for the brain. That's what music really is. It's healthy for the brain. The brain loves it. It loves music more as a language, I think, than the spoken word. And if you think about it, For those of you who were educated in the United States, we were learning our alphabets in the 3rd grade. And I think if someone asks you without the music part of it, just say your alphabets and learn them, it would be a lot harder to remember that. But now we go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It doesn't matter how old you are and how something about that music encodes that information so that it's easy for you to remember it. And I think we are missing a wonderful opportunity to use music for multiple ways, not just health, but learning. I think there's a strong possibility that we could use music to actually impact our learning ability. We just need to be able to figure that out. So I'll stop.
No, that was phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that very soothing, calming brain that you have, because I think it made us all like chill a little bit. At least that worked for me. And your color blue, we learned to center with color and validation. That's my color. So as soon as I saw blue, I was like, this is cool. Yeah, thank you for that. And then the reminder, and as everybody every participant here, no doubt has, at first, when it first happens, been amazed by someone with profound dementia or who has a phasic form of dementia, truly do not, they're not using many words throughout the day, yet they can sing an entire song or sit down and play it on the piano or their violin. It's always incredible. It's always a moment for us all to just take a deep breath at the wonder of the beauty of the brain and how it can all still happen. Fiona, can you explain that a little bit to us? Like, how can that happen?
So we've got a number of things happening, and LaDon talked about vibrating as well. So we really do. We're this sack of vibrating cells, and we resonate, and we couple. And one of the things about music as well is that another friend of mine has been looking at just how much it sets up society, and language is not in this whole area seen as the reason why humans connect socially so well. It's music, because language is something you have to wait and I do it, and then I have to wait and you do it. But when we experience language, or when we sing together, our brains actually entrain. So they're at the same time, and it's very, very powerful. But the getting of information and the bringing up of an old memory. So when we remember something, and when we remember music, which is multimodal, it's called, so lots of different parts of our brain are being encoded with different pieces of information in a single note, even, never mind a song. And that gets encoded into a very large, if you like, think about it as a 3D spider web, full of bigger and bigger and bigger, the more you are good at music, until you get these great big fat balls of intuited knowledge. And they open up all at once in your brain. So it's not a case of having to remember bit by bit. The whole thing becomes available to your brain. And because music is evocative and aesthetic, it has very large emotional hooks. So those emotional hooks are very good at pulling things out of your subconscious memory into your conscious memory. And what music does is it goes bang, and that whole song or that whole piece of music will open up at once. And it's there for them. It's available in their brain. So that's why they can play it or sing it. So it's an amazingly powerful thing. And in fact, when we teach, we talked about it a bit earlier off camera, when we teach early, and when people get good at music in school, it's actually neuroprotective, because it makes a difference. 70 years later to you, your RNA changes and you don't get as much dementia. And it's because of the rich way that it allows connections in your brain.
Hey, Rita, if I could pick up on some of that, because there's rich comments there, Fiona. Thank you so much for encapsulating that. One of the things that I really wanted to say when I created the music with that video that you saw, is alpha waves. There's a lot of discussion that alpha waves is kind of the bridge to the subconscious. And I think Fiona was talking about that. And if you think about the subconscious mind, it's very mysterious to still a lot of people. And I've heard the best way to explain it is that our conscious mind is kind of like your phone. You know, it's very quick. It has short memory, but it can move quickly and you can go a lot of different places and it's portable and you can do that. But your computer has a much bigger hard drive, okay? And so your conscious mind is more like this, you know, it's very quick, but your subconscious mind has so much more stored there. And I think the best way to think about it is when you're learning how to drive, right? I mean, remember when you had to try to stay on between the lines and you were trying to figure out how to, you know, press the accelerator. But now most people, if you've been driving for 10 or 15 years, you get in the car and your subconscious knows exactly kind of how to do all these things. And I think that when we can access our subconscious mind, there are memories there. There are other things that we can access that we may not have the ability to do so. And that was my initial, I think my interest was to be able to get into my subconscious. And if you want to change your programming, or if you want to, you know, set goals, or, you know, why is it that we have these resolutions and we always say, I'm going to lose this or gain this or do something, but after a month or so, it kind of, it doesn't stick. And a lot of people believe we are not actually rewriting our mental programming, because to do that, you have to be in the subconscious mind. And then to get into the subconscious mind, you have to, I think music is one way in which we access it. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. But Fiona, that really it made me think about why I think music is so important.
Oh, this is great conversation. And there is a question from the audience, which Jackie Poole asks, what is your opinion, Dr. Kerr, on sound baths?
Sound
baths?
Oh, well, it depends on the sound because it's very personal. So we've got different theories around sound baths of certain waves, which will put you into those kind of moods. But there's different other areas around making sure that you get people's music that they knew in their 20s, and there's not long enough to go into why that's one of the times. The teens and the 20s are particularly, it's when your brain is changing the emotional structures and pruning an awful lot of other structures. And so it's one of the reasons why teenagers are highly emotive as well. And that we remember our teenage, friends, or our friends we made at high school or university very deeply, and we're very comfortable with them. Another aspect of that is you're also embedding other things that are very emotive and that highly aesthetic. So it's one of the reasons why, you see people get the headphones on and the music in their 20s, suddenly they're off and they're happy and they know it all. So that's also a sound bath in a way, because it again brings back memories that are amazing. But when you get into so I've seen sound baths used in multiple ways. I'm trying to cross across all of them, but I've certainly seen sound baths as well that take certain resonances, because we get back to that again, and put you into that resonance, which then sets up that entrainment of certain types of wave, gamma, alpha, theta, delta. It depends on which one, and then resonates very much at that tempo and gets people entrained to it. Amazing, thank you.
LaDon, would you share with us at least a little bit about your innovative study on the impact of music on mood that you plan to conduct with Meridian Senior Living?
Sure, and I think this kind of dovetails quite nicely into Fiona's last comment. So basically, there's some new research out, and that was an article that I obtained back in 2020, where the researchers, and they were using mice, of course, and they were looking at Alzheimer's. and dementia. And what they found out was very interesting. They found out that you can use 40 hertz, which is a level of sound or vibration. And this is, I think, Fiona, gamma is in the gamma range. And basically what they did is they found out when they used 40 hertz, whether it was a light laser or whether it was the actual sound, that somehow it actually connected with microglia in the brain, which is an immune cell. And these microglia are listening in. They're listening in to the 40 hertz. And when they hear it, they actually go into the brain and they either start removing or prohibit more what's called amyloid plaque, which is the reason for Alzheimer's. And they are able to demonstrate that the plaque is either removed by these microglia or prevented from more plaque of forming, which is amazing. That 40 hertz would be the trigger factor for those immune cells to actually go in and literally attack the plaque around the brain of an Alzheimer's patient. So I'm all over that. And of course, I've created a number of songs already that use 40 hertz. And what I'd love to be able to do, and what I'm planning to do, is working with Meridian and others to use this sound to see if it actually has a positive effect on those patients who have Alzheimer's. And as we know, with most drugs, the drug has one main effect, but about 23 side effects. And all of them aren't great side effects, right? And so for me, music has very few known side effects. And I'm sure there's some frequencies out there that are not the most compatible with the brain. But for the most part, music doesn't have that kind of side effects that it causes such problems that we have to watch out for. So I'm excited about this. This is kind of flying under the radar research that basically has shown that using 40 hertz actually causes very positive things to happen in the Alzheimer's brain, so to speak.
That is amazing. So we will look forward to reading some of that, your preliminary and then final outcomes through that. That's amazing work.
Thank you.
Speaking of how music, well, it affects even, they posit the change in the beta amyloid, but also the way that it changes mood. And knowing that still today, antipsychotics are way too overprescribed. And knowing that they're black boxed for older adults with memory impairment or dementia, do you think we're ever going to get to a time when we can use music more prescriptively instead of giving that pill? Like, what would be your thought process on how long is this going to take? We need something.
Well, I can just tell you that most of my time in hospitals was I worked on a psychiatric unit, and this was back in the back before the earth was cooling, I guess, a long time ago when I was a nurse. But it was, people used a lot of shock therapy and a lot of other treatments that I think questionable in terms of its long-term effect on that person in terms of well-being. So I think that this is sorely needed, that we need a different strategy for those who are affected or afflicted with issues with psychosis and having had to meet the need for antipsychotic medications. We all of those of you who work together and seen this know that these side effects from many of these drugs are just really hard to kind of watch over the years. So to answer your question, I think the word music, I like to use the word vibration, I guess, Fiona, vibration frequencies, because it may not necessarily sound like music. And that's been one of my challenges is when I've recorded my brain waves many times, and many of my friends, I even recorded a newborn baby, just to see what kind of activity would be going there. But I think, getting back to your question, I think it's going to be vibrations and frequencies that eventually, and this was the article I was telling you about, that research article that looked at the 40 hertz. The bottom line from that article was that that's just a piece of the iceberg, that there are other frequencies. If we can understand, for example, the pancreas secretes insulin from the islets of Langerhans. Is there a way to jumpstart that? Do we know what the frequency of a healthy pancreas is? And can we somehow create that state in the body again and therefore interrupt the problems that come? I don't know the answers to that, but I think if we can show, in which this research is showing, that with 40 hertz, you've got parts of your immune cells listening in that can go now and remove some of that, then I think, yes, it is very likely that we can find treatments for folks who are having psychosis. I don't think there's any question about it. The real issue is going to be, what is the code, so to speak? What's the formula? What is that frequency that is the one that we're looking for? And that's just going to take time. So bottom line, yes, I think it's possible. I think it's likely, but I think there's a lot of research still yet to be done.
And we do know, and Vicki points this out in the chat, that that the cause of disorientation in many older adults isn't purely Alzheimer's. It's a combination, from psychological, emotional, aging, all of those changes, and no one thing is ever going to take care of it.
Yeah.
So
if I can come in a little bit as well on that.
Yeah.
So yes, we have some fascinating new information all the time around and around how we resonate, around cellular resonance, and then going up to sort of levels of organs, and then the whole person, and then person to person. That's that kind of interspecies and interpersonal resonance. So things like the different parts of our body. The other thing that we need to take into account, which is beautifully connected with what LaDon's saying, is with music, the other aspect of it is the resonance of the different, if you like, the body parts of each other when you're in space. So we get back to that connection. And it's one of the reasons why, if you're singing together, for example, not only have you got various hertz from that, you've also got a band of hertz from the human voice, which a part of our brain oscillates that all the time, waiting for that human voice, and it connects down to the socio-emotional areas. And then if you're also, say, dancing or touching or just holding hands when you say, then you've got this other load of chemical and physiological changes too. So you get this really rich combination. And excuse me, and babies are really fascinating in that. I think we talked about it in the last discussion. Gosh, sorry, it's the middle of the night. Because part of music is that oscillation through bone in the body as well, and your skull. Excuse me. Then what we have this amazing thing of, and when we carry a baby in utero, they get used to the sound vibrations of the human voice. When that baby's first born, the mother needs to sing to the baby because their brain's not differentiated to hear any of those apps that are, lullaby apps that just don't work. But if you sing to your baby, and at the other end of life with aged people who know you, if they know your voice, then that will actually entrain their brain as well when they hear you. And if you're singing, and if you're also close to them with that chemo signal exchange, and if you touch them with the C fiber attenuation, And if you're looking at them with eye gaze entrainment of that, just imagine how rich that is.
That is amazingly rich, and everything that you just said reminded me, and probably everybody else that's ever seen the Naomi Feil Gladys Wilson video, of exactly that. Just as the infant, excuse me, is waiting to hear the sound or the voice of their mother, I believe that Gladys was waiting to hear, and waiting too long to hear, the sound of someone's voice like Naomi Feil's. And we all have the capacity to bring that gift to people who need to hear that. And she did it through exactly what you said, through song, through knowing the songs that are familiar. I'm seeing people saying, if it's not familiar, if they don't like it, it's not going to work. We know that. Know that what she knew what Gladys loved. She sang that to her. She used mother touch. She used that beautiful eye gaze. And through that, we all watched a miracle. And those are the daily breakthroughs that all of us can have, and have more often, if we all would practice that more intentional way of connecting. So thank you for explaining that. That's amazing to hear.
And the lovely thing is, we know now, but I guess I've done the work because it's proving it. It's giving people that quantitative science that says, yes, this might feel beautiful, but it actually is very complex science, and it's legitimate, and it's, you know, you have agency. It's the most incredible superpower that you've got.
And speaking of super, oh, LaDon, please.
No, I know we're getting long on time. I was just going to say, I saw a couple of chat comments about using the wrong kind of music, and they absolutely, we've got to remember that, you know, you can actually misread by using music that might be either, whether you want to call it offensive or somehow disruptive in terms of your brain. And so that's a challenge too. So, you know, there's another side to this. The final piece I wanted to just, you know, music, I think, has so many different potentials. I really am interested in encoding of knowledge with music. I really think that information can be easily provided to the person or into the brain with music, possibly better than just a spoken word. And this is just something that I've been working on, not doing it right now, but have in the past. I'm looking at inner city kids who may be having difficulty with, let's say, quantitative scores, like the order of operations in algebra. And so what I did is I worked with a young man who was a musician, and we wrote a song called The Order of Operations. And we put that to music. And our goal was to have students watch this over and over again throughout the semester, and then take the standardized test on how to solve for X to see if those students were able to retain that knowledge rather than. And so anyway, I know there's people are doing this all the time now, but I think we'll eventually figure out how to make this work well, where we can somehow share lots of information in a way that we wouldn't have thought in 50 years ago that we can actually get that person to learn. I know it's hard to explain it, but I think everybody on the call knows where I'm going with that.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that again, it applies to the whole spectrum of life, early, I mean, from infancy through, all of the things that we're talking about certainly apply. In the context of validation, these techniques that we've talked about today are so powerful, and your explanation of some of the why or what's going on behind it, again, is just amazing to, I'm sure, to all of us. I've often heard, and I'm sure, again, if any of you have seen a Naomi Feil workshop, you have heard her refer to people that validate as almost being superhuman. Like she says, you should all be wearing a cape. There's something very special about individuals that learn this method and that use it effectively, of course. And Fiona, you just mentioned superpower, and I know on our offline conversation, you and LaDon both started talking about the superpower of this, of what we can have as individuals. Can you talk a little more to that superpower concept?
Yes, so there's a lovely example that I guess I give, because my mom was a nurse, I was a psychologist, so and worked with autistic children very young, and we've all felt that we've been lucky enough to have that, see that power of that direct connection. So I worked for a couple of years with the Dean of Nursing at the university, because we were proving, I guess, that the changes, and took an example of a nurse going into a patient. So they'd met the patient, just like you have when you work with your people, and they had a connection. The voice was already entrained, and that person was stressed. And what happens at the moment in situations is we either have pharmaceuticals, or if it's really not great, then we will have some sort of technological restraint. And so we have various ways of, seemingly calming people down. So I spent some time looking at the difference between that treatment and a nurse being able to come in and have the agency to make that decision and have 5 minutes with that person. And what you see is when their nurse came in and just sat and looked at the person directly, so they'd met before, and very often, and we did both, they just put their hand on their hand because they were worried about something, or they were in pain. There was 2 reasons why they were in allostasis, 2 reasons why they were stressed. So what had happened was their cortisol had gone up, their adrenaline had gone up, their oxytocin had dropped, their sympathetic nervous system had kicked in. So their HPA axis, which is like the governing system across all of your nervous systems, was firing, and the cortisol receptors in their body were not being able to mop up cortisol, so up that was going, lots and lots of changes, physiological changes. When that nurse started to connect and talk and just do all of those things we've talked about, get that neural connection going and those cytokine kind of physical things, then what started to happen was the HPA axis, the amygdala, the hippocampus started to calm, and the cortisol brushes, if you like, started to work more again. Oxytocin went up because of direct eye gaze. That kicked off the immune system. Leukocytes started to increase. The pro-inflammatory cytokines started to drop. Up went dopamine and serotonin, and the nervous system started to calm. So within 5 minutes, you had such a big change in that person, and they started to, basically what I guess I talk about is, if you allow that, then you're going to get patients and people that heal faster, because all of those things start to kick in and off goes your immune system. You're going to get staff that are happier, because remember, they get so many of those chemicals. It's like, it's reciprocal, and they feel like they know that they're doing good. So, and they have a choice, so they've got agency. So that's a way that you keep good staff, and you don't spend as much on your pharmaceuticals. And it's a win-win-win.
Beautiful. What a great way to end an amazing session. I really can't thank you enough for being here today, for sharing your knowledge. There's a lot of excitement about all of it. And again, just look back, and I truly just value Naomi Feil's work in coming up with all of these concepts so long ago that today are being so beautifully researched and borne out. So I thank you for that. I think we've still got 2 minutes. I don't know if there would be one other question we could take. Oh, Dr. Jones, have you recorded the brain waves of a person with dementia?
I have not, and that is one of the first things we'll be doing with the research that's coming up with Meridian. Yes, and I'm also interested in recording the brain waves of someone who is in a comatose behavior, and just playing that music back to see if there's a response physically whether there's a heart rate change or whether there's some body chemistry changes, because, there's a lot of research now that says potentially individuals who may be in a comatose state can actually still hear, or they can actually sense. So I'd like to be able to validate that. And if they can, we need to help them to also find a place of peace and to relax as well. So
super important point, because in phase 4, we learn to use our techniques very briefly, because we really don't know what their reaction is, since they really can't respond or let us know. So we wouldn't want to overuse a certain kind of music all day for someone who's in the late stage of memory loss or in hospice care. Being more deliberate and more thoughtful is super important. And Feil always reminds us, don't overdo any of it, because you really don't know how they're responding. But keep
if I can come
connecting
in
with
really
them.
quickly on that.
Yes.
Again, the HPA axis, the part of your brain that's very immature in babies. What's one of the reasons why when they're very tiny, if you get a mum who overstimulates them and picks them up constantly, not kind of just carrying them around, but always kind of going in and picking them up, then that's why they'll get irritable after a while. So kangaroo care works beautifully for a while, but then you've actually got to let them rest. Mm-hmm. And because we have some similar changes in the brain in aging for white matter and gray matter, that's right. What we might get is that the HP axis gets irritable again if you overstimulate it. And we do know that people in comas and those sorts of things do have that activity, going up, even though we can't see it. We can measure some of those things. So it's a really good point.
Thank you. Well, everyone, I know that there's been a lot of information shared today, and we will share these resources further with you. And Charles, maybe you can speak to that as you close out the session. But again, thank you so much for all that you've shared with us, all of your knowledge and your great work.
Thank you. Thanks,
Dr.
LaDon.
Kerr, Dr. Jones, Rita, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Thank you, all of VTI, all of the VTI audience ecosystem crowd movement, I want to call it. As a reminder for all of you that are expecting CUs, please take the time to fill